You know, I don't think this game would have even been remotely on my radar if not for a Grindstone member being heavily sold on the title as something for us to play. Of course, it being one of the many arena shooters to suddenly hit the market after Blizzard decided it wants to make its own Team Fortress game, what sets this one apart for us was the fact that it had a very extensive PvE mode, and heavy progression elements that put lots of it more in line with a MOBA. And despite the very vocal protests of my co-writer, I tend to enjoy some of Gearbox's offerings. So, I decided to fork over the cash and make this episode because I'd like to get some kind of return on this. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Battleborn. Battleborn is a very much buy-to-play arena shooter brought to us by 2K Games and Gearbox, maker of the Borderlands series, and you can pretty much expect that kinda over-the-top humor here. At conflict with that is a very serious story framework about the heat death of the universe, where a ruthless villain is attempting to speed along the ultimate apocalypse by aiding a group of eldritch horrors to snuff out the last remaining star in the universe. However, despite the heaviness of the entire story, the game remains very lighthearted. The game combines arena shooter action with MOBA gameplay, and I have a feeling I'm going to be saying that a lot in the coming months. Best to explain all the nuances and differences about this game in this review, that'll inevitably be drowned out by commenters screaming, "Screw this, Overwatch is better." Shall we dance? One of the most notable aspects of this game is its wacky graphical style, most obvious in the characters, but it does carry over to the strange alien environments and architecture. Proportions are all over the place, with impossibly thin characters like Wrath and most of the Degenerate faction, and the hilariously bulky body of Montana carrying a ridiculously tiny head. There's a nihilist AI program and an ornate robot body, humanoid mushrooms, a diminutive four-armed witch, an old man with a laser-shooting hover chair, a demon enslaved by a punk rock girl, and a baby penguin in a scrapyard mech suit. Wacky is seriously at the forefront and made all the more amusing by the distinct personalities of many of them. While the environments are pretty cool, we don't really get to see most of the last solar system, limiting us to 3 planets within it, and they basically stick to the tropes of ice, forest, and city, although they are fairly interesting ice, forest, and city planets. You might get tired of the aesthetic of a certain world, however, and there really isn't much variety to that as of yet. Both the characters and the environments are a very high contrast and colorful style, making the whole thing look very bright and vibrant. My video's bitrate will be screaming at me. In fact, a lot of this has to do with how the game alters its environments. You'll be transported into dark voids or cybernetic constructs that'll make you go into some serious whoa moments. A downside to all of this is that it's a very busy looking game, and visual clutter has been used by plenty of people to describe the utter chaos of the visuals you might see on screen. Once you activate Isaac's rotating ward skill and find your screen cluttered in the vomit-inducing state of spinning honeycombs, you'll figure it out pretty fast. It can be hard to keep track of everything going on in the game, and even the HUD gets a little crowded and flashy at times. It'll take some getting used to. Beyond an opening song that's a rap and a questionable selection of music that's used in its trailers, the music in this game all fits in an intense but ambient techno-sci-fi that I can barely hear. As if descended from on high in response to me complaining that so many games start at deafen you volume, Battleborn came out barely audible, and I've done plenty to try to fix it, including contacting customer support. I can still hear the game to a decent degree, but I'm apparently not alone in this issue, even though some in Grindstone remarked that they actually had to turn the game down as it was too loud for them. So, I'm confused. Luckily, I have Grindstone member DeBeer to thank, as he was able to rip the OST for me, so we would have something to back my voice besides creepy silence or live recordings of Grindstone randomly yelling things as we played. Sound work is a bit louder, still relatively muted on my end, but the game's bombast comes forward more in its sound work and even more heavily in its voice clips. I understand that humor is subjective, but honestly, this is some of the better voice work and humor that I've seen in a game in a while. Characters interact with each other fantastically, both in PvP and PvE, and have plenty of quirks among them. Not everyone is as one-dimensional as some might let on. Hearing Isaac's happy tone masking the depression and insanity he feels after becoming a nihilist is as funny as it is kinda heartbreaking. Rendane, being a mega-maniacal villain, still has some time to fire quips at you or brush off his subordinates' unfounded dread of him, and it makes for some of the more amusing moments in the game. Of course, this game doesn't shy away from harsh language, so my internal swear filter is once again off for this. I can rant about any f***ing shit stains being c***bags in community matches. Wait, what the f***?
Well, I'll be a How the hell are you, please?
Isaac, you haven't changed.
Nope, still the best at what I do, which, incidentally, is bringing death to my enemies. And that's you. Kill you soon, please.
Okay, yeah, while the game does use harsh language, it does bleep it out, and there's no way to undo that, as it tends to use this for heavy comedic effect, including moments where profanity bleeps drag on for longer periods of time. Think some of the jokes used in older episodes of South Park, and you'll get the idea. Honestly, I think it works, and makes some of the lines even funnier as a result. You might not enjoy it for one reason or another, but I feel it works overall. Starting out, you'll be limited in your options on the main menu, ensuring that everyone at least tries out the game's prologue to get some of the storyline. The game's introduction starts out with a very stylized, hand-drawn animation reminiscent of Aeon Flux, enhanced with CGI that helps set the mood for the game to follow. When the game presents a rap song by Deltron 3000 to accompany it, Grindstone had mixed feelings about that, while I personally just started to get Samurai Champloo flashbacks. Yet, that song doesn't seem to coincide with any of the other music used in the game, as the aforementioned music is all sci-fi and technology themed. There's also a rock song that's used as an introduction over that animation for other missions, and it feels like a more cohesive fit, but those expecting and hoping for more like the rap song will be waiting a good while to hear it again. Once the introduction ends, you're given control of your first character, and the introduction serves very well as a tutorial, since the story-based nature of the game helps the tutorial come across less like a lame hand-holding step-by-step process, and more showcasing early character introductions in the game's style of humor. There's an odd quirk with the control scheme, however. Note when we say odd, we don't mean bad. Gearbox just decided to take some usual FPS staples and tweak them around, most notably using the R button for reload and interactions, which has caused no end of accidental skill usage by pressing the more common E key, or reloads for characters that can. Fortunately, muscle memory tends to set in rather quickly within Battleborn, so you may have some hilarious bumbling early on with the controls, but that shouldn't last. Once that little hurdle is scaled, the one thing that becomes quickly apparent is the intense focus on humor that the game wears on its sleeve. If you happen to watch many of the game's trailers before it launched, you'll be very familiar with this game's sense of humor. Gearbox is on point here, as it would have been very easy to fall into the trap of writing memes and non sequiturs than just calling it a day, but instead, they decided to focus the majority of the humor on the interactions between the various characters, which leads to some of the funniest moments in the game. Speaking of those characters, Gearbox outdid themselves here. Every character is at the least a bit memorable, and while we'd love to tell you about each and every one of them, the video would be an hour longer and have the majority pack of it here. What we will say is that the game does follow your typical MMO style of tank, healer, and DPS, with support characters that act as a bit of a branch between the Holy Trinity, or focus on buffs and debuffs. While having the Trinity can be incredibly useful in the game's PvP, the real meat of this system is used within the game's fantastic story campaign. Not only are these missions rather well designed, with a few small hiccups here and there, but the writing for them is also very well done. There's a lot of variety within the missions as well, even if on the base surface you're just killing waves of enemies over and over again. It's the pacing and the writing that keeps things feeling interesting and keep you invested in pushing forward, even if it's just wanting to see the next hilarious thing that would happen. You might even find subsequent playthroughs and or using different characters can get you alternate dialogue for many scenes.
I like this gun. Where'd you get it, Captain?
It's a modded UPR machine pistol. At least it's handiwork, actually.
Yes, it's designed to work in conjunction with your horrific disfigurement.
It's an Eldred bio-gauntlet, Cleese.
You say tomato, I say horrific disfigurement.
PvE missions take place in episodes, with 8 in total if you don't count the prologue tutorial. Each episode mission is rather meaty in content, taking upwards of 30 minutes or more to complete each one. The missions all contain elements of tower defense, horde mode, run and gun, and some rather interesting boss fights, both in humor tone, as well as the multi-phase battles that'll have you guessing just how to take each one out most efficiently. I was fully under the impression that this game was just created as a PvP game first and a PvE game second, but the amount of focus on these missions has me thinking the opposite might be true. One mechanic held true to both modes of the game is the shards mechanic, in which you collect shards by finding them on the ground, blowing up larger shards, or killing some enemies. Collecting shards is an active currency for the matches and missions, which are used to power turrets and certain checkpoints that you'll find on the map, as well as purchase your gear upgrades once you've unlocked them. Gear is also collected and rewarded from missions, allowing you to choose a set of 3 each time, each with vastly different shard costs, stats, and quality levels. Some will even include downgrades as a trade-off, and RNG is a massive factor in making sure that you'll find something useful. Don't be surprised if a white-level common gear piece you find is better than a blue-level rare gear piece for your needs. Hell, I once found a shard generator that granted me 2 free shards every second while debuffing the ability to heal others, which of course is only a detriment to a few characters, and it was completely free to use. Just don't go blindly selling items because there's a lower quality rating is all I'm saying. Through the matches, you'll also gain levels and experience, which translates to a MOBA-style helix system, giving you a choice between 2 or 3 character or skill augments per level. This is where you might have to choose between things like having a stronger shield or the ability to move at full speed when firing, or selecting the ability to boost your lifesteal when using skills, or just boosting it when using melee attacks. PvE also uses a live system, as when you're taken down, you have a small amount of time that you can be revived by a teammate for free, or you'll be forced to respawn at a checkpoint for a lost life. Your entire team will share a pool of lives, so it's good to revive people when you can. If you're playing the game on hardcore mode though, the minute you die, that's it. You'll also find a plethora of items that you can pick up in addition to the shards, like health orbs, score and credit boosters, speed and speed buffs, gear pieces, and even extra lives. Be sure to smash up any crates you see, and of course get used to the odd pickup item key being R again. Better score will grant you medals and better experience and credit rewards, and credits can be used to hasten a few unlocks. PvP in turn feels a bit less meaty, but still like something that was planned from the beginning, with only 3 modes of play: Capture, Incursion, and Meltdown. While shards, levels, and gear still come into play in PvP, lives and respawns are expectedly unlimited. Capture is as simple as it comes. It's a point capture and hold mode, with major differences being that small camps of Arelsi are merely minding their own business, and you can farm them for level up orbs, considering that there's no other way to gain experience beyond killing other players. Incursion takes heavy pages from the land of MOBAs, in which you're on opposing sides of a mirrored arena, with 2 sentry units that you need to protect while going after your opponent's sentries. Minions will spawn and march down the middle to make the job easier, but sticking with them isn't as important as it is with MOBAs. You can also recruit monsters from nearby camps by defeating them and taking their point, and spending shards to spawn a massive minion, or set up turret defenses along the map. A point tally is also kept to make sure that there's no match that goes on for too long. If the timer runs out without a sentry being destroyed, the team with the most points wins. Meltdown is slightly similar to Incursion in that it takes MOBA inspiration by including a 2-lane map and a minion march, except this time you're bringing the minions to a point that they can be sacrificed. Sacrifice enough and you win the match. This is probably my favorite of the 3 regarding its humor, not so much its playstyle, as the robotic volcano god Minrek yells out some of the most absurd shit as you're playing. One amusing feature of the PvP is that the game has built-in taunts for each character, with more that you can unlock or earn. Pressing G will perform this taunt for everyone, but if you perform the taunt immediately after getting a kill, the enemy player that you'd killed will see this taunt front and center of their screen. You can consider this a risk-reward, however. The risk being that the animation usually takes so long that you'll be shot to shit by the enemy team if you pause the globe mid-firefight. The reward being, you get to be an ass? In fact, character interactions carry over to this so well that some characters are marking on who they killed or who they've spotted in matches. It all comes down as very lively and can offer up plenty of chuckle-worthy moments, as humor is, again, a central driving force to this game. Well, that and earning unlocks, which comes with its own issues. Considering that PvP is a focus in this title, having so many characters locked behind progression and achievement walls seems a bit crap, especially when you consider that their gear, and even additional helix options, are linked directly to their character level and how much you use them. This means that any opponent you run across in PvP could have a very heavy stat advantage on you simply because what they have equipped, or what options that they have available to them when leveling in the match. I personally don't mind it too much, and I've always enjoyed unlocking things in games, but I'll admit it makes the battlegrounds a potentially uneven feeling place until you've spent enough time in them. Like most any community these days, you have a mixture of the good and the bad, though given the game's humor, you're more likely to run into oddballs when matchmaking for the campaign. and rather unhelpful, overly aggressive types in competitive PvP. The major difference from your standard MOBA is that Battleborn follows the Heroes of the Storm route and allows you only to speak to members of your own team. However, this still translates to your team being far more likely to call out players specifically and be passive-aggressive asshats, while you'll very unlikely ever know what the enemy team thinks of you. Clearly, this hasn't stopped the worst aspects of MOBA communities from seeping through. People are still willing to throw in the towel at the first sign of adversity or start verbally attacking their teammates for perceived shortcomings in play. It's rather unfortunate the game is saddled with such a burden this early, and this could easily turn away potential new players from giving the game a shot. The campaign matchmaking isn't much better, but for different reasons. You can still get a standard armchair general who'll flip out the moment they feel they aren't being paid attention to, or the typical MMO elitist who will lose it if so much as a single thing goes wrong. Yet, while these sort of things are to be expected, perhaps a more annoying example are those who would seem to go out of their way to drive this game's humor into the ground. If you decide to matchmake with others outside of your own friends, you can expect to hear several mics turn on when a joke hits the punchline, give a bit of a chuckle and then read the line back to you verbatim, or just talk about how this is the best game ever while you're just trying to listen to it. Personally, I was immediately advised to just shut the voice chat off, and I feel I'm not missing much. If there is one thing that can kill a humorous game's humor, it's the player base endlessly repeating it on a loop, and butchering the delivery every time, or just yelling out, "Oh, this is the part where they say the thing," which just overwhelms the dialogue so much that you'll miss it anyway. We have to highly recommend to just shut voice chat off or bring your own friends so that you can all enjoy the game's pacing and humor as it was intended, and avoid any insecurity from usual pub groups that feel that they need to comment on every line or every playstyle. This will end up being a rather brief section, as thankfully at the time of the review there isn't really a cash shop. Gearbox hasn't added any sort of microtransactions or pay features outside of the game's Season Pass. The Season Pass, though, is a point of extreme contention, as the game isn't really cheap to begin with, clocking in at a hefty $60 US, and then having the gall to have the first thing you see when booting the game up be a message about buying their DLC so you don't miss out. It's a terrible way to make a first impression, and it wasn't only my writer Dresker who had their mood immediately soured on the rest of the experience. As much as I love progressions and unlocks, with Battleborn the characters make up the game's charm and humor, and having them locked behind a progression wall and a possible paywall makes it feel like you're being forced to pay more to get all that content up front. Fortunately, there's a few free goodies to be earned simply by signing up with Gearbox Shift, which is yet another Game Company X community hub that every company seems to want to shoehorn in these days. After signing up and linking your account, you'll be able to earn special rewards and unlocks for the base game, simply for being a member, with the current selection of goodies at the time being several skins for various characters. An odd side project comes in the form of Battleborn Tap, a mobile game available on iOS and Android that's essentially Cookie Clicker or Sakura Clicker. Tap on enemies to kill them, collect shards to upgrade, and purchase Battleborn to fight for you. It's got some bells and whistles like unlocking different Battleborn, including the upgrade and gear system. It's okay if you like that sort of thing, and stupidly addicting if you definitely do, but even if you don't, merely downloading the game and linking it to that Shift account will net you a gold skin for Orendi, so at least there's that. You know, for a shooter that wasn't even on my radar, I found myself quite enjoying Battleborn. And while Grindstone's opinions are definitely divided, we all at least had fun enough with the game for a tertiary recommendation. And once again, check out my website for our unfiltered opinions. I'm sure you'll find someone saying something that you won't like. This is something I definitely plan on playing often, and while I know I say that a lot, at least this is something that lends itself well to that kind of play. That, and I can't just abandon a character as fantastic as a cheerfully nihilistic AI. Here's my final rating. Despite a very traditional capture mode, PvP is an interesting blend of MOBA and shooter gameplay, with plenty of quirks to make it quite enjoyable, and quite different from other games that this one's being compared against. Sure, the players can make it a frustrating pile, but it's an overall great way to play the game if you're into shooter PvP and are looking to get some better experience. What really makes this for me, though, is the PvE mode, which came out way more extensive than I expected it to be. It's a charming and amusing story and some generally interesting battles and memorable stages. It's not something I've seen too often, and it's something that could have easily been another case of tacked-on bot matches, and it really holds its own. concluding in a manner that doesn't feel too much like a cliffhanger, so I look forward to seeing what's to come. Of course, if you enjoy lighthearted games or Gearbox's sense of humor, you'll feel right at home here. I haven't laughed this hard at a game in a good while, but at least not one that intended me to laugh, and even repeated playthroughs can give me pleasant, humorous surprises. It's $60, and yes, pedant sales and discounts exist, but the game has an expected retail standard price, and that price can be a big barrier of entry, especially compared to similar titles on the horizon. Of course, if you're fully committed, you can pay for everything else ahead of time by forking over the cash for a season pass. We'll just see how required that might be once the new content comes rolling around. I'm just hoping they make Nova a playable character. Combining the high-octane and heavy competitive nature with the even more competitive my way or the highway attitudes of MOBA players can end up making this game one hell of a toxic environment when it comes down to it. A PvP match we joined as a group of 4 did not hesitate to have our auto-recruited 5th member blame all their failures on us, despite the fact that we ended up winning. Bring friends or prepare to start hating existence as much as Isaac and I do. I can't stress enough that $60 seems steep. It's not a particularly long game, and an online server-only game with even more paid DLC on the way seems a little off, and can be a serious barrier of entry for a lot of people, especially since so many other companies are trying to bust into this genre too, with a much more reasonable price tag. Sure, the extensive PvE is a thing all its own in comparison, and I'm not here to argue the value of digital media versus physical media, or how they have to share some sort of price tag, but it's just one of the pricier games of this kind. I think a major barrier for some, especially those who see this as a PvP game, is that having just so much of the game behind a progression wall will seem unfair to those who saw a character in the trailer and couldn't wait to try him out. When you're boasting 25 characters in your game, and you give us access to a fifth of that from the outset, it's a little jarring. I was all set to give Phoebe a try, and I still haven't unlocked her, as you'll need to earn either a bunch of account levels, or kill a good amount of opponents in PvP only. This gives the players with more time and dedication to the game the ability to get in far more practice and unlocks of the character before those with far less time available. And some might see that as unfair when PvP is involved. That's entirely your call, however. If anyone's flipping out about seeing so many shooters that are buy-to-play on this show, rest assured that the next episode will be a free-to-play MMORPG. It doesn't mean I'm completely done with shooters in the time to come, but this should be a nice break. Once again, thanks for stopping by. Clicking on the left window will take you to my episode on The Division, because, I needed another $60 shooter review. Of course, if you spent most of this going when you're going to look at Overwatch, you can click on the right window to see the side quest on Overwatch, and don't worry, I'll probably end up doing a big video on that come time when it's actually released. If you think my next episode clue is a bit too vague, or you want to help me support the show in general, you can head on over to my Patreon and check out what tiers I offer, including previews for upcoming episodes, as well as the ability to preview the script live as it's being written. One such supporter, Slipstream, would like to plug his podcast as well as his stream at twitch.tv/slipstreamx14, as well as his own website at notokensrequired.com. Granted, that show's been on a hiatus for like a month now, and I'm not sure when it's coming back, but he didn't tell me to say anything else.